Okay, I'm here to show you the fixed version of the build I uploaded yesterday, the 3.17 Detonate Dead Necro. And that build I had uploaded saying it was a solo self found viable build. This build I'm not going to say is. It's almost solo self found viable, but it requires a specific helmet enchant, and I don't think it's quite fair to claim that anything is solo self viable if you need to grind for one of those enchants. Now, once we see the Atlas, maybe we're going to see that it's not that difficult to get a helmet enchantment, and then I'll change my mind. But for right now, I'm saying that this is like a budget hardcore build, but it's not solo self-found. The other thing that's been added is an Empower gem level 3, so that's also not necessarily solo self-found friendly. This build works by casting high-level corpses with unearth and blowing them up with Detonate Dead. And then we use a cast when damage taken setup to increase our cast speed significantly. So when you're just mapping, you'll never be using the cast when damage taken part of this build. It's just sort of like, if you can imagine if you were like a melee slam build and you went up to a boss and you threw down your ancestor totem, that's basically what this totem is going to do for us, only it's going to be burning through corpses instead of hitting them with something. So, first off, how do we get to the numbers? So I have my enemy corpse life set at a little over 200,000. And I'm going to show you how we get there. So what we need to do is find the corpse life for a bone archer, which is what unearth, the type of corpse that unearth summons. So this is for bone archer, and this is on Poe database. Now the highest they track is to level 90, and for a normal bone archer, they record 86,583 life. And I need to know what it is for a level 93 bone archer, because I get mine a bit higher. So we'll see how I calculate what that is. Now if we look at this, it was 86,000 and change at level 90. At 85, it was 54,000 and change. So let's try and figure out how much it increased from here to here percentage-wise. So this, the level 90 divided by the level 85 life, it increased by about 60%. Okay, let's make sure this is relatively consistent. So if we check the 85 life to the 80 life, so that the level 80 life was 31,000. So level 85 life divided by the level 80 life, that was a little bit more. That was about 70% increase over those 5 levels. We'll check one more. So level 80 to level 75. Okay, so that was 18.8. So check this, and we're back down a little bit, which I thought was odd. I was expecting it to be a smooth curve one way or the other, but it looks like it bounces around between 60% and 70% every 5 levels. So if it's increasing by that much per 5 levels, we'll say conservatively it's just 60% between 90 and 95. Then that means per level it's increasing by about 12%, because 12% by 5 is 60%. So we're 3 levels over 90, so we will assume that we've increased by 36%. That seems like a fair assumption to me. Okay, so let's take this number times 1.36, 30%, and that gets us to 117,752. But we have more multipliers coming in on top of this. We have 10% here, 10% here, as well as 50% here. So we're going to take this number and we'll multiply it by 1.7, which is an increase of 70%, and that'll get us to the corpse life number that I'm using in the build. Hey. Okay, so how are we getting our unearth levels this high and not being unreasonable about it? Well, I said that we have a level 21 unearth and a level 3 empower. Now, obviously, if you wanted to push it further, you could say, well, I have a level 4 empower, I can do more damage, or I have a +2 amulet to levels, that's even more levels, but I didn't go quite that far. I do have a +1 amulet on, and I have the gem socketed in Honor Home, which is a +2 to level of socketed gems helmet. Now, there's nothing particularly important about Honor Home, it's just that one modifier, and this is, I think, by far the cheapest, easiest way to get that modifier. But it could go into any +2 level of socketed gems thing with 4 gem sockets. Okay, so that gets our unearth to level 28, which creates corpses with level 88. And this is the helmet enchant that I said that we needed for this build to work. It says unearth spawns corpses with +5 level. So we're actually spawning corpses with level 93. Right? 88 plus 5, 93. And this is not accounting for the 5 in the helmet when it says 88. Okay. So let's talk about the ramp up loop. And this ramp up loop is something we only need for bosses. Literally, we don't necessarily even need it for them, but it will do a lot more damage. We are doing a cast when damage taken setup to create corpses and then eat them. And in doing that, we're going to increase the number of corpses that we have consumed in the last 4 seconds, which is what Corpse Pact looks at. And Corpse Pact says we have a 2% increased attack and cast speed for every corpse consumed recently up to a maximum of 200%. And we're going to hit that 200. So normally we're getting some because when we cast Detonate Dead, the corpse is destroyed, but that count is consumed. So that's some of the increased cast speed, but we want more for a quicker ramp up. So what we have is a spell totem that's summoning skeletons. And it's going to summon 4 skeletons every time it triggers. This doesn't necessarily need to be level 1, but it needs to have +1 level from somewhere. So if you had it on an amulet or something, that would also work. I just had it like this, at level 21. The reason 21 instead of 20 is level 20 summons 3 skeletons, and level 21 summons 4, and I need 4 for it to do enough damage to me. And the reason this is doing damage is the Heartbound loop. Anytime a minion dies, I take 350 physical damage, and that will trigger when I hit the minion cap and try and summon more. Okay. So how am I taking enough damage? Because we have 28,000 and change armor before the guard skill. So wouldn't we just be taking 35 damage a minion? And the answer is no, because we have imbalanced guard. And what this node does is the maximum damage reduction for any damage type is 50%. So if we would take 350 damage per minion death, now we're taking 175. And that is enough to sustain the trigger for cast when damage taken. Okay, so if you haven't seen this node before, it might seem concerning. What do you mean the damage reduction for any type is 50%? Doesn't that kill our resistances? And the answer is no, because damage reduction doesn't relate to resistances. It's a different step of determining how much damage you take. So damage reduction has to do with like fortify stacks or strength of blood or armor or endurance charges. And armor and endurance charges is how we are resisting physical damage. So this works for our purposes in increasing the amount of physical damage that we'll take. And it doesn't really matter how much we take. If it's a huge amount of our damage, if it's a small amount of damage, we're going to take half of it because of imbalanced guard. Okay, so every time we have these 4 skeletons die, we take 700 damage. And the cast when damage taken says we trigger these spells and we've taken 661 damage. If we look at summon skeletons, it's casting 4 times a second, which sounds perfect if you look at the cooldown for cast when damage taken, because it says it's a quarter of a second. So it's like, wow, we're at maximum efficiency. But the reality is the cast when damage taken, the server doesn't update in uneven intervals. So it only updates like every 0.26 seconds, not 0.25 seconds. So this is actually kind of an unfortunate cast rate. But it's not terrible. This is just for ramping, so we don't need it to be perfect. So instead of getting it to go 3 times a second, instead of getting it to get 4 times a second, we're closer to getting it 3 and a high percentage of, like 3 3/4 if you put it over a larger amount of time. But like the first time it goes, it's only going to trigger 3 times in that first second. So if we're doing this 3 times a second, and we're triggering Desecrate and Bone Offering 3 times a second, that's 15 corpses that we're consuming a second. And then if we put that over 4 seconds, that's 60 corpses, leaving us with 40 if we want to hit 100 for here. But we're also casting vol detonate dead, and we're able to cast that pretty frequently, 5 times a second. Now this is counting the maximum time, so before ramp up, let's just go here. So we're getting 60 on the most pessimistic part of the spell totems, but we're able to cast this 4 times a second, even at the slowest, so that's 12 corpses per second. So that's giving us an additional 48 corpses a second, which means that within a couple seconds, especially considering that it's not really even going to be just 3 casts for that totem, because the next time it's going to be 4 in the second, we're easily going to make it over 100 with just like a second and a half of ramp. Okay, so that's how we're getting to 100 corpses a second. All right, what else do I need to explain? Okay, how are we recouping the damage? So before, we had this loop going all the time, or at least I thought the loop was going to be going all the time, so we needed to have regeneration going all the time. We don't need that now, because we're just putting this totem down for boss fights. So if we have another way to get life during boss fights, we don't need to regenerate at all. But here's how we're covering the damage. So we're taking between 2,100 and 2,800 damage a second, depending on how fast the spell totem is going off. We're going to recoup half of that. So we get 6% here, 6% here, 18% here, 4% here, 4% here, and 12% here, for a total of 50% of the damage recouped. So we need to make up half of that. So that's somewhere between 1,050 and 1,400 damage per second we're going to need to make up in a boss fight. Well, we can regenerate 800 of it, and then we can, let me get this over to Corpse Explosion, because this is our main damage, and we'll life leech 1,300. So we're getting more than enough damage in a combat scenario, which is the only time the totem's up. If you were concerned about this and you say, I definitely want to out-regen without relying on life leech, you would take these 3 nodes. And now you're going to be there. Could take a 4th node just to make sure, because it's somewhere between 1050 and 1400, closer to 1050. You can also put on a stone golem if you're concerned about it. However, since we only have it up in combat, I'm not really worried about it, especially because we have other ways to gain life. We could always just have a life flask if it becomes an issue, but I don't expect it to be one. Okay. Oh, one more part of the loop, if you're not familiar, we need to make sure the minions stay alive so that they don't die too early. Wait, is that even still true on a spell totem? It's actually not even true on a spell totem. We don't need Blessed Rebirth anymore. Huh. Okay. Well, that means we could cut this out and we'll have a bit more flexibility on skill points. Cool. All right. Well, room for improvement in this build then. I may put out an improved one in a couple days then if someone's interested. Alright, so let's finally calculate our damage. We have a DPS of 1,157,000. So let's put that in. Oh, sorry, that's the total. Yeah, no, total DPS as well. Okay. 1,157,468. But it's not just that amount, because we have Spell Cascade, which means that it's going off 2 more times in front and behind every time. So we can multiply this number by 3. So up to 3,400,000, but how are we going to get to my promised 4 million? Well, the ignite damage is another 222,000. Okay, that's still not quite there, but this isn't, the Corpse Explosion isn't the only thing that's happening. The spell is also happening. That does 123,000 damage times 3 because it's also spell cascading. So 369,000 damage for a total of just over 4 million. So as promised, we are back to 4 million DPS. It does require an additional click, and it's also slightly worse on defenses. I'll show you that now. So before we were more like 14.5 on a maximum hit taken from 10,000. Now we're down to 14. We used to be like 29, 29, 30. We're now 28, 28, 29, so not quite as good. But considering the DPS that we're getting out of this, and considering that we still have a lot of very profitable skill points left, like I haven't taken efficiency yet. Apparently I can cut this out, so I'll be able to be more efficient that way. I think we're looking at still an extremely strong build. So let me know if you have any questions or comments about it. I will look to put out an improved POB, since we don't need this anymore, in a couple days. Well, maybe faster than that. I'm not sure. I'm a little bit burnt out on this build, but I'll put up this now, and I will look to improve it even further later. Okay, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.